Thanks so much for joining us on our Promising Practices webinar today. I know people are still joining the meeting, but we'll go ahead and get started. Just to let you all know, this meeting is being recorded, and you'll be sent that after the webinar to have and to share with your networks as well. So before we get to our speakers, just wanted to introduce myself, the League, and what this webinar series is for. I'm Sarah Lipscomb, and I'm the Program Director of All-America Cities and Community Assistance here at the National Civic League. And the National Civic League has been around since 1894, and our mission is to promote equitable communities through civic engagement. And we have this webinar series monthly to help communities learn some different practices and models that can hopefully be adopted and adapted into your communities. So we are very lucky to have with us today on the table to talk to us about community dialogues. Just wanted to briefly mention a few of our other programs that are happening right now. Our annual All-America City Awards is coming up this June. And we've just announced our 20 finalist communities, and we're really excited. I know some of them are on this call today as well. And we invite everyone to come and attend that event, and there'll be more information in the follow-up email. And then lastly, we are also doing a one-day conference in conjunction with the All-America City Awards this year that is all focused on promoting equity. And we have 3 different focus tracks, so health equity, youth and education, and police and community relations. And as you can see on the screen there, we've got some really great speakers lined up as well. So we encourage you all to come out to Denver and to join us for those 2 events. And there'll be more information on registration and the workshops and things like that in the follow-up email. But without further ado, I do want to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers. We have Joe Horace, who is a National Civic League Fellow and is also at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And we have Cheryl Hughes, who is with the Chicago Community Trust, and they're going to speak to us about their program On the Table and how you all could use that in your community and what the benefits are of doing community dialogues in your city. So thank you so much, Cheryl and Joe.
All right, thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining us on this call. I'm very honored to be on this call with you all and here with my good friend and colleague and partner on the table, Cheryl Hughes. We've been working together as partners. This is our 5th year. It's amazing. And we've learned quite a bit, as you can imagine, about this model that Cheryl and the Trust developed and created and invited my institute at UIC to help with the research and the survey associated with On the Table. But we thought we would do a joint presentation because I didn't think it made a lot of sense to just present the data without the model. And so invited Cheryl to join on this webinar. And so Cheryl's going to walk through the model, sort of describe it, share the Trust's experience with it, point out some key elements, and then she's going to turn it over to me. I'm going to talk about what we learned, and I'm going to turn it back over to her to describe actions and other follow-ups and kind of where you go once you've done this and the potential for On the Table. But we're very excited to be sharing this model. I don't know if folks have heard of it before, but we're going to describe it very thoroughly. And then when we're done, which probably we shouldn't be talking for longer than 30 minutes, we'll open it up for questions for you to follow up with. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, and she's going to get us started describing the On the Table model.
Hi, everybody, and congratulations to everyone on the call who is being considered for one of the All-American City Awards. Joe, thank you so much. This is really exciting to talk about On the Table as a great model of civic engagement. And I just want to start with, on the table in Chicago is really is a civic holiday here. One day in May, we ask everyone in our region to have a conversation about our future and what our communities need and how we can all take action and to make a difference in our community. And I guess a couple of things to start with. The Chicago Community Trust is a community foundation. So we're the fourth oldest and one of the largest community foundations in the nation, which gave us an opportunity to be a neutral convener. So we're trusted, well, those people who actually knew who we were, we're a trusted neutral convener in Chicago. So while we work with government agencies, we work with local nonprofits, and we also manage the philanthropy of thousands of individuals in Chicago. So we have a great deal of influence, I would say, but we are always working on behalf of the community. And I was brought on as a new member of the trust staff to think about our centennial. We turned 100 in 2015. And looking at the past history of the foundation, I realized there were two moments where we had very important conversations over meals about our community. And the first was at the founding of the foundation in 1914, a group of men, affluent men, were having conversations in private clubs about how do we solve the social ills of Chicago, which at the time we were the fastest growing city in the world. 60% of our population didn't speak English as a first language. So here we are 100 years later, and we still have major social ills, and the city is losing population. So how are we going to address this very different need in a century? And also in the 90s, the trust came together to, after the riots in LA, to host a series of conversations in private homes, facilitated conversations about race relations in Chicago. Both of these were very important moments in the history of our foundation. So when I was looking at our history, I proposed to the president at the time that now is an opportunity for us to ask everyone in the region to have a conversation about our community. And we did that in 2014 was our first year. Our goal was we had very basic goals. We wanted to have at least 10,000 people participate. We wanted to garner media attention, and we wanted to expand our presence on social media and drive participants towards action. And as you can see, this model really took off in Chicago. In 2014, we had close to 12,000 people participating. And last year, we had about 100,000 people participate at different intersections on the day of On the Table. We try to keep the majority of our conversations on a single day, and we've been very successful at that, so much so that people are actually now using on-the-table models year-long. So let's just go over a couple of basics. I mentioned we're a neutral convener. The other thing that is different about this model of conversation that's different from the dozens of conversation models, all excellent quality models, we do not have professional facilitator. We have hosts. And we ask the host to guide the conversation, but we have a firm belief that everyone can have a conversation and, frankly, do every single day, but we're giving guiding questions. The other thing is that these conversations need to happen over food. If they happen in a meeting room without food, it's just turning into a business meeting. But when you bring people together around a shared meal, whether it's cookies and tea or breakfast or lunch or dinner or barbecue, it changes the dynamics in the room. So a couple of the other basics, kind of guiding principles, we had to talk about the foundation had to believe in the unknown, right? Like, we had to believe that we were creating a container for people to have the conversations they wanted to have about our city. The next thing is, when we were organizing this, the original project team were, frankly, a lot of control freaks. And we realized very quickly that there was no way we would be able to control 1,000 conversations. Like, we just didn't know what was going to happen. And people were contacting us, asking us, can I do this, can I do that? And we realized that we had to design a model that had no barriers to participation. That, originally we thought these would be dinners, but we said, it needs to be breakfast, lunch. I mean, frankly, there are so many conversations happening in Chicago on that single day. I know people that go to a breakfast, they go to a mid-morning meal, they go to lunch, they go to an afternoon tea, they go to a dinner, and they go to drinks. Like, that's how big booked up the calendar is on that day. So we needed people to organize this however they wanted to organize it. We just asked that there be food and that you be focused on a solution. And we took a pretty firm stance for the first 5 years that we were not going to focus on a single topic. I think that now that we've been at this for a while, it's time for us to maybe think about asking everyone to do a single topic, because we know what people are talking about, but we wanted to make sure that everybody had an entry in. The next is that we needed to be inclusive and intimate. We could have gone the route of the big conference room with 5,000-6,000 people in it with, at conference room tables, but it just felt too sterile to us. And we decided that we wanted people to have these where they felt most comfortable. And we limit the size of the table to 12 people. We feel that more than 12 people, conversations break off. We encourage people to have potlucks in their home. I know of nonprofit organizations that actually give their employees the day off to host conversations in their homes with the hope that they'll be talking about the work of the nonprofit. Or, frankly, the nonprofits see the need in their communities for all of us to be citizens and residents to take ownership of our communities. We know that about 60% of the people who participate in On the Table meet people they've never met before. And that's because we encourage the host to invite individuals outside of their network or to have guests bring guests. Last year I saw a photo, the weather was so nice in Chicago, people actually had barbecues or set up tables in the middle of their street after they'd had a street closed. It's a pretty dynamic way for people to meet and gather. The next is no agendas. As I mentioned, no agendas, that slide got dropped. You know, we provide host kits. The trust does not have an agenda. People would ask us, why are you doing this and what are you going to do with this information? And our response was, we just want to hear what's important to the community, and our promise is we will report back to you on what we heard. And that was our promise. Like, we're here to listen. The foundation had been viewed as an ivory tower of an institution that didn't listen to anyone. And now we're seen as an institution that actually is serving the community in a very authentic way. And people hear, when we say your voice matters, people believe it. One of the things that happened after the first on the table, the first and second on the table, is what we heard was so profound, we actually changed our strategic plan to align more with what we heard from the community. And we're going into another strategic plan right now, and we continue to use the data from on the table to guide us. And that's been very important, that feedback loop. We also hope that government leaders and nonprofit leaders also use this information. So we're very solution-oriented to ensure that people don't come together and just focus on issues and problems. We want them to talk about their ideas to solutions. And people use on the table for lots of different ways. The photo we're looking at actually happens in a housing facility here in Chicago, where the management of this facility said we need to listen to our residents more and talk to the residents about how do we make this place better. We've seen our local sheriff use on the table to have conversations with inmates in Cook County Jail, which is the largest incarceration facility in the nation, and it also has one of the highest populations of people with mental illness. And through his on-the-table conversations, our sheriff saw just how profound some of these issues were, and he used what he learned to change how he managed that jail system. And he ended up hiring a mental health professional to run the facilities, and they've created programs to address it. We also know that neighborhoods have used on the table to start ideas about taking back their neighborhoods in areas where there are high evidence of violence, communities using their acting up dollars, which I'll talk about, to host overnight gatherings to make a neighborhood safer. And there's also, many of you may have seen the posters around your neighborhoods that say, hate has no home here, which is a global social movement that actually started as an on the table in 2016, that during the presidential campaign, the anti-immigrant language was very concerning to a neighborhood whose elementary school speaks there are 47 languages spoken there, and as their civic action, they decided to print posters to say hate has no home here, and they needed money to print these posters for their community. They needed about $600. They put up a GoFundMe page and raised $12,000, and that campaign has gone global. That started as an on the table. So solutions, small, medium, and large. We affirm and inspire. This is, we want to connect Chicagoans to a deeper level in their community. We know that people have shared values, and we all have an inspiration to act. Even in this virtual world, people still crave human interaction and the power to get things done by working together. Over 80% of respondents shared an idea or raised an issue of concern. 95% of participants believe that they have influence in achieving change in their community. And finally, we stay connected. Social media is a very important part of what we do with our hashtags. I should say that when we started this initiative, we had 300 Twitter followers. So for us to actually end the day in the top 10, which was our goal, was a pretty hefty goal. But we ended the day in 2014 number 1. We beat Game of Thrones and Mother's Day and the Solange Jay-Z video in the elevator kind of beat us for a while, but we came out on top. And in our second year, we actually trended nationally. So people in Chicago know the On the Table, know our hashtag. It's a way that we are able to raise the awareness actually of what our foundation is. We had a very low visibility. Unless you were a civic leader or a nonprofit, you likely didn't know who we were, even though we give away about $270 million a year. But we find that people know what On the Table is. The project has been replicated in about 25 cities right now. The Knight Foundation is actually funding 12 of their Knight cities to replicate. And we see a growing interest in community dialogue and listening, which I know many of you do that as well in your everyday work. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who is our thought partner on this whole design about how do we let people know what everybody was talking about.
Thanks, Cheryl. So you heard Cheryl reflect on what the Trust has learned and what has been learned from the process. But there's also what can we learn from the participants. And so we were asked to help with a survey to flush that out in the first year, in 2014, where we were guided by really 3 simple questions in that first year, which we just continued to carry forward each year with the survey. Who participated, what was discussed, and how did it impact them? Those 3 questions are what the Trust was interested in understanding from participants. So we invited On the Table participants to respond to a 10-minute survey that we designed, which actually had a lot of questions, about 30 questions, but many of them were quick, including some demographic questions at the beginning, or questions that could easily be answered with a short answer, as well as some that may have required a little bit of thought or ranking or ordering. There were 3 ways to respond: an email invitation. The email invitation, what the Trust did was share with us its registration database for the first year. The first year was actually a mix of hosts and participants who were interested, and in following years it was really mostly hosts, but included quite a few participants as well, for whom we had email addresses, so we sent an invitation to them. There was also a web-based link, so even if you just joined a conversation on the day of or never signed up anywhere, you could go to the On the Table website on the day of and click on the web-based link that was available there to complete the survey. And then in the last 2 years, we added the option and really pushed the option of a paper survey, which really helped to extend the participation and outreach into communities where the digital divide may have been an issue, or just that the Trust was lesser known, or folks were more comfortable with paper. And it paired well with an increased outreach process, improved outreach process that the trust put in place in the third and fourth years as well. So in total, 11,500 on-the-table participants fully or partially responded to the survey over 4 years. The bulk of these were via the email link, and you see there those 2,000 folks by submitting a print survey. And again, with the improved outreach, with the trust doing an enhanced community partner strategy, that really helped with getting more folks to fill out the paper survey who probably never would have filled out an online survey. What has struck me, and I think struck us as we reflected on the data that we have for the 4 years, is what's been remarkably consistent across those years. And so I'll highlight some of those. People tended to be talking about, or at least mentioning that they talked about, really topics that fell into these 4 categories, really year after year. These 4 categories were consistently in the top 5 among either issues discussed or topics that were mentioned either as a concern or an issue individually that respondents wanted to address. I'm going to step back for a moment. One of the things I want to mention is that this survey is of on-the-table respondents, so they're self-selected. So this is not at all scientific, and we always have the caveat that you can't generalize to the broader population. But I think we can safely say when you have 11,000 surveys about anything, each of which contains a whole lot of data from a lot of questions, that tells you a lot. And so that's how we've sort of proceeded with interpreting the data. But this by no means is not equivalent to a random sample survey, which is a completely different process. And so we saw those 4 key issue areas really year after year. And then the other thing we were seeing as a trend is that people were reporting that the conversations had helped them to become better informed. So they were learning from each other. Nearly 70% of the respondents indicated they were somewhat to much better informed about community issues. And so we know that is definitely something that the respondents indicated to us as one of the benefits. We also know that On the Table draws out an engaged group. 71% of respondents describe themselves as somewhat to very involved in their communities. And this is an important statistic because it's also associated with a lot of other measures of civic engagement, people voting at higher rates, people attending a public meeting. Recently, a lot of the standard stuff that you might see on the census around civic engagement, we asked a few of those questions. And this was the question that was sort of most associated with high scores on civic engagement. And so these are folks who can be your allies. If you're an institution, a civic leader in your community, On the Table is going to draw out folks who you want to connect with, who you want to help you to reach out to others. They can be connectors in your community or rockets or whatever the term is, but they can really help you multiply your outreach and impact. Of course, the flip side is it also shows how difficult it can be to reach the less engaged, which is always a challenge with any sort of broad civic engagement endeavor. We also know that the conversations brought new people together. Cheryl mentioned the 60% of respondents meeting new people. If you go a little bit higher standard than that, and which we asked people to indicate did they stay in contact with new people, when you put those 2 questions together, we get 43%, at least in 2016 and 2017, where we asked the question that way. 43% of participants reported staying in contact with someone they met at their conversation that they did not already know. So this is important. You know, On the Table really can help you build community. You know, staying in contact with someone you just met at this conversation is a pretty good indicator that the conversation helped maybe spark the seed of a new relationship or a new connection. And in this era of division and, you know, political difference and divide and class and other divisions that may be present in your communities, you could definitely use On the Table to help maybe start making those connections again. And then finally, these conversations are inspiring action. 88% of respondents indicated that they were likely to take some type of action following their conversations. And this is really something we're looking to explore further, maybe with some follow-up research, to really understand for those people who did take action in some way, what the nature of that was. Was it sustained? Did it connect to the following on the table? You know, we have some of those questions that we're thinking about right now. But I mean, even if you think about this statistic, 88%, even if half of those people didn't take action, you still have a pretty healthy percentage of people who did. And so, you know, we can guess and hypothesize that people are leaving these conversations energized and intent on following up. And we know, we're hearing anecdotally even, that they are, you know, wanting that, they're hungry for that action and that follow-up. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cheryl, because once you've got folks all sort of ready to go, what are the kinds of things you can do to help support actions that they could take?
Thanks, Joe. Well, I will be quick because I know we promised to keep our comments to a half an hour. But we've tried several different models about acting on some of the ideas. But I want to focus on the one that's been really the most successful and the one that's connected the most with community members and residents, and that was in 2016 we developed this Acting Up Award, and we were literally saying we want people to act up in their communities. We want them to take action upon their ideas. We had tried a few models of action that was more at city scale with larger dollar amounts, and it was just too complex for individuals to take on that type of role, or at least the ways that we did it. So we scaled it to the first year $1,000 awards, and we asked people to submit a 2-minute video to tell us how they were going to act up in their community. We expected, I don't know, maybe like 150 videos, and we had over 400 videos submitted. And since that time, we've given away about $195,000 to 135 projects over the last 2 years. Last year, we added a $2,500 level. This year, we've added a $5,000 level. And I realize that those numbers are probably quite large, but at the foundation, we have a donor base who have felt that this was an important thing to donate to. But I do believe that if there is something to give people a way to act upon their ideas, there's lots of ways to approach that. But it's an expectation that the conversations don't just end after that one day in May. And if you go on YouTube to the Acting Up Awards, you can see the videos of some of the ideas. You'll see in the right-hand corner there is a young girl, a drawing of a young girl in an afro, and that is a coloring book that was created by a group of 7th graders at a local school. They had a 7th grade project, and their project was about how to talk to victims of sexual abuse. And they wrote the coloring book, but they didn't have enough money to print the coloring book. And so Jasmine from this class sent in a video asking for $1,000 so they could be able to print the coloring book. So those are the kinds of actions that have come out of the Acting Up Awards. Again, there's a whole website dedicated, or a whole YouTube channel dedicated to this. And you can find a lot of these stories and more information about On the Table at onthetable.com. And you can read Joe's reports at onthetablereport.com. And I think with that, we are going to open it up to any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe and Cheryl, for taking the time to share with us about On the Table. We have had some questions come in already, and if you all do have questions, go ahead and enter them into the chat with a private message to the host, and we will field those for you. So the first question I have is, Joe, you had mentioned in the evaluation that there were 3 questions that you asked. Can you reiterate those questions again?
Sure. The first was, who participated, helping the trust understand who they were reaching, what the demographic, that was essentially our demographic background questions about who participated. And then what was discussed was the second question, which was, what topics were discussed, what did people, what issues did they bring up? And those questions tended to be a short answer. We did a lot of qualitative coding of those to boil those down to the topics that I mentioned, those top 4, but there's a much longer list than that if you look in the report. And then finally, how did it impact them? And that third question is really about understanding what they took away. What did they learn? What did they do? How are they inspired? Did the conversation change them in any way? That sort of thing. So those were the 3 questions.
Great, thank you so much. So kind of along that line, you had talked about collecting the demographic information of participants. Do you guys run any analysis on what that looked like compared to the overall demographics of Chicago? And if there were major gaps of groups of people that weren't participating?
Yes, we did collect that we collected gender, age, race, and education level. And we did track and compare all of those to the county census data. The respondent pool for the survey tended to be more white than the regional population, and tended to be a little bit older. But when you broke down the percentages by race, On the Table improved over the years. But in the initial years, there was a stark there was quite a disparity between, the largest disparity was among Latino respondents and Asian respondents. And as the trust, and Cheryl, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but added and improved on its outreach process, and then also, one thing is, the more you do this, you build momentum, there's brand recognition, and people get a sense of what it's about. But in the certainly 3rd and 4th years, we saw the African American respondents match or even exceed one year the regional population share, and Latinos made a big jump, getting pretty close to their regional population share. Asians, I don't think we ever quite hit that, but a much smaller percentage in the Chicago region.
Yeah, and I would say that there were three reasons that we saw really the evening out of the data, and we did see the evening out of the data in the age ranges as well. As Joe mentioned, we just got better and better at our outreach. People understood what we were attempting to do. Each year we would be able to go deeper and deeper into our community relations, like farther and farther outside of our own networks. But I think that there are two other things that made a big impact, and that was a paper survey. Once we gave people an opportunity to use a paper survey, the number of people participating in the survey jumped, and we saw a greater number, particularly of the Latino community. There was a much larger response rate. And the other thing is the third and fourth year of On the Table, because we were scaling at numbers so large, 50,000 to 100,000 people, we had to say we need to be able to provide money to communities that have food insecurity. And we were able to give gift cards to purchase meals to local community groups, and we saw our numbers rising out of that as well.
That's great, Cheryl. You've hit on quite a few of the other questions that have been asked, but one quickly to build off. Did you all also offer the survey in Spanish or in other languages?
Yeah, all of our materials, both survey and the host guides, were available in English, Spanish, Polish, and Mandarin, or Chinese. So those were the four, and you could actually use Google Translate to download in other languages as well.
Great, wonderful. Another question about the surveys that just came in was, how were they returned? Did you all have self-addressed envelopes, drop-off points? Did people collect them right after the conversations?
Yeah, so for the paper surveys, most of the paper surveys were going out through what we called our partner network. So one of the things, again, this was a scaling question. Like for us to hit 12,000 or 20,000, we could do just with a standard operation plan. I mean, very much like a political campaign, boots on the ground. But to scale to 50,000, Joe and I developed a new concept, and it really was our partnership, where if partner organizations, and we didn't care if they were businesses or nonprofits, if you committed to hosting at least 10 tables, so 200 people, we would allow you to add 5 questions to the survey. Because what we found is that lots of people wanted the data to be sorted for their community, but the numbers, once you were breaking down into communities or sectors, the numbers were too small, and confidence would have, confidentiality may have been broken. So if somebody needed data sorted specific for them, we needed to know that there were at least 200 people in that pool. So with the addition of those 5 questions, we saw these larger and larger groups, and from those larger partnerships, they were able to collect their surveys and either mail them back to us, or you could drop them off. I mean, every year, I should say the first year, we ask people to tell us what they're thinking beyond the survey. So part of the survey is actually tracking social media, but we created a portal for people to send us their comments and ideas that we would flip the website from being a website about how to sign up to showing all of the ideas that people had so that everyone could read them. So we were very active about getting surveys back, whether it was faxed in, whether people dropped them off or mailed them back in.
Great, wonderful. So we have a few more questions coming in about the food portion of On the Table. So since it was a requirement, did you all provide support to those only in food insecure areas, or was that offered to all groups that were participating?
So the first 2 years we did not offer any support. I would say the exception there were things like homeless shelters or the Cook County jails. You know, there were special areas where we would offer some support. When we were scaling at the $50,000 to $100,000 level, we did give away gift cards to nonprofit organizations that were in communities that had food insecurity. But for the majority of On the Table participants, this is what we find that to have deeper engagement, people need to put their own skin in the game. And you know, we're not asking people to have catering, right? We're just saying over some kind of food. It could be, you know, potluck, as you saw in some of the photos. It could be sandwiches. This did not have to be fancy. And our kind of our lens were if communities were struggling to eat on an everyday basis, those were the communities that we would provide access to those gift cards. But that was a limited number of people that participated. I think it's really important that a project like this, if for a foundation, if we were spending all of our money buying people meals, that wouldn't give us the opportunity to provide money to spend on people getting support to take action, which is where we focused our efforts on.
Great, thank you. And yeah, no, that definitely makes sense for those that, you know, food's going to be a barrier to participation by offering those gift cards. And then for those who that's not a barrier, that's a way to get their skin in the game. So definitely appreciate that answer.
Can I just add one other thing? Can I add one other thing to that topic? So other cities have made partnerships with grocery stores or restaurants to have discounts, and I think that that's great. In Chicago, when we were doing this, we made a decision that we felt that we decided not to go with the citywide grocery store or us using a sponsorship model, because this would have been a very easy sponsorship model. We wanted to make sure that people were supporting local businesses, so that if we were giving them gift cards to buy food, we were encouraging them to buy it in restaurants in their community or grocery stores in their community, because we want this to not be an extractive program, but rather a program that adds back into the community. So that was really a thought process that we went through.
That's great. Yeah, promoting the local businesses, you know, through this process is really strong as well. So switching gears just a little bit, we've gotten a lot of questions around what kind of the outreach mechanisms were to ensure diverse audiences especially some of the things that you guys that did that had results of improving the racial diversity of participation, and is there anything in particular that you did with the LGBTQ community? So kind of a few questions rolled into one about outreach and how you really got diverse people on the table.
Well, as a foundation, we're connected deeply with community through nonprofits and other civic leaders. So we were able to leverage that network very effectively. The other thing that we did is we created a steering committee that had representatives from many, many, many different types of community in Chicago. One, to provide us some thought leadership around what the questions we were asking, what our outreach, and we made sure that we were connecting with as diverse of a population as we could. Early on, we were very specific about having all of our materials in multiple languages and trying to get as deep in the community as we could. Now, the issue about some of these demographics is these are the demographics of the people who took the survey. And one of the biggest challenges when dealing at a project of this scale is actually getting people to register their conversations. We estimate that 30% of the people who participate in On the Table, and it's probably higher than that, don't actually register. So if we don't register, we don't have your contact information, we're not going to be able to send you any materials like the survey, which is one of the reasons why I always felt like we were undercounting or the demographics in the survey were underrepresenting the communities that participated. And we saw giant jumps once we started doing the paper survey. But I guess from an outreach perspective, we're always looking for those groups with large networks. So, how are the community colleges connected, which we quickly learned our date was terrible for all universities because it was in May. How are we connecting with the public schools and all of the barriers getting into schools is always a challenge. But we connected with, anybody that, I spent and my boss spent for 6 months, every day we were going to somebody's meeting talking about On the Table. We were very intentional about all communities, including the LGBT community. The other thing that we did, I mentioned social media. We had 300 Twitter followers and probably that many Facebook followers. So we had to build a robust social media campaign, and we don't have the any of the images on this PowerPoint, but one of the biggest things that I think we did is we changed the look of the foundation to mirror the community. So we had the first year 350 ambassadors who came to the trust, had their photos taken. We recorded their stories about what was important to them and their community. And we spent 4 months leading up to On the Table. So we announced in February and had the On the Table in May. Every day there was between 3 and 7 social media stories about our social media, about our ambassadors. And we chose those ambassadors based on how broad their social media network was and how and all the communities that they were connected in. One of the big communities we connected in, which never had a connection with the foundation, we got a bunch of rock musicians and rap musicians to come and be ambassadors to talk about On the Table and the Trust. They are not our typical community. And we also had an advertising campaign, an outdoor advertising. So we had taxi tops, we had billboards, trains, and we purchased advertising on the Spanish language television, the Spanish language radio, the African American radio, and our local NPR. I mean, we've never advertised. So the outreach was immense in both boots on the ground at meetings and then the social media infrastructure, which allowed us to become #1 in the city that day, and then the infrastructure of just broad-based advertising, because people were like, what's an On the Table? What does that mean, right? So those are just some of the strategies. We also worked, another key strategy that was brilliant strategy, I didn't think of it, but it was brilliant. Our media, Guskoka Terman, who is our public affairs firm on this project, and Daniel Ash, who's the chief marketing officer here at the Trust, made the decision to visit the publishers and editors of every media outlet in Chicago, small, medium, and large. And they went and met with them before we announced On the Table and said, this is what we're doing. We think you should participate because you need to listen to your constituents as well. And they did. So these outlets covered the announcement, then they covered their own conversation or other community conversations, and then they covered the survey results. So all of that is wrapped up in an outreach strategy, and you have to have the feedback loop of reporting back after the survey so that you can demonstrate we've heard you and this is what we're going to do about it, about what we heard. And all of those media outlets reported the results of the survey. So it's a very robust strategy in multiple forms. Did I forget anything? No. Oh, another thing we did that Norma is with us in the room, we actually hosted webinars about how to host a conversation, right? Like light facilitation training. And we would have hundreds of people log into those webinars to ask questions about, well, how do I have a conversation if somebody argues? What do you do? And we would use the deliberative dialogue techniques about how to manage a conversation. So we provided a light touch, but we were expansive.
Great, thank you for that.
Did I answer like 18 questions there?
Yes, you did. We really appreciate it. So I know we're about to come to the end of the hour, but I just wanted to get one more question in. You've talked a lot about the collaboration that you all have done, and you had mentioned that you share the results with other institutions like cities and nonprofits. Could you tell us a little bit about what they have been doing with the information and if there are any kind of larger projects that are being leveraged across those sectors?
Well, the first thing I want to mention is that if you go to the onthetablereport.com website, all the reports are there, but there's also an interactive tool where the data is available. If you click on the data link, there's a data tab, I should say, there, and you can filter the data by question and by results and see visualizations of the data. So we took very seriously making this data available to the public. I think really the main kind of data utilization, I guess you could say, for it has really been by a lot of participants who are curious about, what people talked about, and, how their topics and issues sort of played up against what respondents as a whole have said. And I think it can be really powerfully affirming if you see, something that's important to you. And I think we definitely got this kind of vibe from a lot of participants with regard to equity and social inclusion, that with a lot of the issues in our city, the persistent, violence, public safety issues, the persistent segregation, challenges with housing and our educational system, that folks were the concerns about that were starting to spread beyond just the neighborhoods and communities that were most affected. You started hearing it from folks who don't fit a particular demographic that you would expect to be talking about that. And that is really, really powerful. And I think, like Cheryl mentioned, I think definitely influenced the trust, adopting, consideration of that in its strategic plan, and just thinking about race and equity across its program areas. So, I don't know that we can say, well, this specific partner took the data and did this research on it, but we were also the research partners for the Night Project, the first year of the Night Project that Cheryl mentioned, and we know in some of those cities, one in particular, they partnered with a city planning agency that already had a process in place and used the data from this to enhance what they were collecting in that city.
Are you still there, Sarah?
Yep, I'm still here, and thank you so much for sharing. I know that we have gone over on our time, but really appreciate you guys sticking around to answer questions. And this will be recorded and sent out to everyone here momentarily. So thanks so much again.
Well, and Sarah, if anybody wanted, we did a bunch of work on race and equity that came out of On the Table that I'm happy to talk about with others if they want to email me.
Okay, wonderful. I'll go ahead and include your contact information in the follow-up email as well.
Great. Thank you. Thanks everybody.
Thank you guys so much.
Bye-bye.